Hello, 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 and welcome to all you PMOs, PMEs, POMOs, POMEs, and PIMQs. Welcome to the world, the podcast where we discuss all things related to the process of waking up, walking out, and moving on from life as a Jehovah's Witness. I'm Dr. Ryan Lee, a former JW with a doctorate in clinical psychology and a practicing therapist specializing in helping former JWs and other former cult members move through the recovery and rebuilding process. Okay, so today we are going to talk about therapy. We're going to cover a lot of different aspects, but mostly cover the broad strokes. What is therapy? How does it work? What are different types of therapy? We're also going to talk about what to look for in a therapist and how to figure out which one is right for you. Okay, so first off, I want to say that for the purposes of this episode, when I talk about therapy, I'm kind of using it as an umbrella term for any professional interpersonal relationship that is geared towards understanding yourself better, recognizing your patterns, working through difficult emotions, and clearing out any cobwebs that keep you from being your best, most authentic, most alive version of yourself. Now, through this lens, this includes coaches, life coaches, counselors, therapists, psychologists, psychiatrists, anybody that's dedicated to sitting in front of you, checking in with you, what's going on with you, what can we figure out here? Now, of course, there are some distinctions between these different groups and how each of them operates. But in my experience, and this is backed by research, the connection and the strength of the relationship is the most important thing. Not the background, the degrees, whatever title or modality, not even whether they have any knowledge about religious trauma. I would go so far as to say you'd be better off with somebody who just started after finishing a 6-week coaching program, who you have an authentic connection with and you feel is personally invested in you, than being with a therapist who may have a doctorate, 20 years experience, but you feel kind of meh about. That's easy. Honestly, I would go for the authentic, personal connection every time. And there's a lot of reasons why this connection is so important. But one way of looking at it is that it provides the foundation of the very, sometimes difficult work that follows, which can involve looking at parts of yourself that you've spent a lifetime avoiding, or sharing the not-so-pretty, maybe even pretty gnarly aspects of yourself in the presence of someone who you feel safe with, someone who authentically likes you, who you feel is on your side, and will continue holding you with positive regard, especially in those moments that you're having trouble holding yourself that way. That connection is a vehicle for exploring the magic or the particular medicine that person carries, and how their magic is a catalyst for bringing to life your magic. Okay, so already I've digressed a bit, but I don't regret it. I'm going to say this multiple times through this episode. The connection is so fundamental. It is so important. But okay, back on track. So, what is therapy? Now, for people who've never been to therapy, they generally have this idea that they've seen from TVs or movies, where the therapist is all about giving the perfect advice, that a lot of it is you just kind of talking endlessly, that it might be about divulging your darkest secrets even though you don't want to. And this is a big one that's really a problem, is this idea that they will fix you. Now I'm going to take a second to dispel some of these cultural myths around therapy. While in some cases therapy may contain some aspects of these things, it generally doesn't work like that, and for good reason. So for example, giving advice or telling you what to do with your life. While a therapist may offer reflections or ways of seeing things differently and occasionally offer ideas for how to approach a certain situation, you should always be in the driver's seat. And a therapist's ultimate goal should be to empower you to make your own decisions, not to tell you what you should do with your life. And yeah, while a big part of therapy is talking, sharing and revisiting critical moments in your past, simply reciting your life story alone isn't really the key ingredient for growth. A lot of people have this idea that, especially when therapy first starts, that if they're able to share every single detail of their life, of everything that ever happened, particularly around the bad stuff, then only then will the therapist know enough to be able to help them. And not only is this not the case, but it's just not even possible. We could spend 10 lifetimes trying to detail every little thing that's happened in your life and why you made the choices you did. And we're still never going to reach a point where your therapist will be in a better position to decide what's right for you than you are. Personally, I'm a believer in the idea that the relevant aspects of the past are always contained in our present experience. And if we can be attentive to the present moment, we can learn everything we need to know and let that inform which moments of our past we'd like to revisit. Another way to say this is that people, again, they have this long-running list of every bad thing that's ever happened. And there's this idea that all of these things provide the solution or the answer or the explanation for why I feel so fucked up right now. But the truth is, there's a lot of terrible stuff that we go through that in some cases doesn't really affect us that much. Or we're able to move past because we have certain resiliencies in certain areas or that kind of thing. So again, this idea that we have to go through every bad thing that's ever happened to us in order to have good therapy is just patently false. What we're looking for is the stuff that is most salient in the moment. What is the stuff affecting you right now? Where are the areas you're struggling? And then how can we use the past to understand some of the patterns of behavior that may be in place right now that contribute to you struggling? Okay, so more dispelling. So this idea that therapy is about forcing us to share or relive things that we don't want to. That's not true at all. It's about creating an environment where you feel safe, and ideally that you feel authentically motivated to share those things with someone you know will hold you lovingly. But it's not about just sitting there and going, I'm just going to have to tell you my deepest, darkest secrets, even though it makes me super uncomfortable. That's not what it's about. And then finally, I want to touch on this idea that the therapist is there to fix you in some way. Because to talk about needing to be fixed implies that there's something wrong with you. And maybe the most common theme in the people I work with is discovering that there's actually nothing wrong with you, other than the fact that you've been taught to believe that there is something wrong with you. If we really want to narrow it down, if you need to hear something's wrong with you, that's the thing. That you believe something's wrong with you. That's the thing that we need to work through. Again, especially as ex-Jehovah's Witnesses, you've been told that you're bad and sinful, and you're always one mistake away from being a full-blown terrible person. And most of the maladaptive behaviors we developed have come about as a way to compensate and alleviate the pain of believing this lie. And also, a lot of times what are seen as maladaptive behaviors are actually quite adaptive in the sense that they enabled you to survive and stay relatively safe in an unsafe environment. And the only issue really is that our current environment doesn't require us to have those defenses anymore. Okay, so we talked a little bit about what therapy is not, but let's spend a little more time on what therapy is. In essence, therapy is about exploration. Sitting down and going, what's going on here? Why do we feel this way? Why do we keep finding ourselves in the same situation? And how can we make different choices that will lead us to a more fulfilling and happier life? And also, what's going on underneath all these questions? What's the thing that we actually need to feel? It's about spending time sitting in the unknown, acknowledging the complexity of life, and sorting through what we can and can't control. It's about empowering you to find your own answers. Again, not telling you what you need to do, but supporting you in figuring that out for yourself. It's about developing a capacity to be with difficult feelings. This one is really important, and I might do a separate episode about this. But yeah, we're so kind of locked in this, what do we need to do, and what is the problem, and what is the solution, and how do I need to be in order to be the best self? And, that's okay on one level. But a lot of times, all of this stuff is a way of us avoiding feeling things that we don't want to feel. In really good therapy, it's going to get to the root of that. How do we feel stuff that doesn't fit nicely into a box? How do we be with that and just experience it? And very often, through experiencing that, we come to a place where we're able to let go of some of those difficult things. So a little more about what therapy is. It's perhaps the one place in the entire world where you can speak without any filter. And it takes people a while to be able to trust this, but it really is the case. It's a place where you can say what you really think and what you really feel while also acknowledging and honoring the fact that we may feel very different and often paradoxically towards any given situation. Making space for the feeling of, I love this person, and also simultaneously, I fantasize about murdering them. Just to be honest about that stuff, because that's real. That's what's really happening for us. All of us, all the time. We have so many different feelings, and they all just sort of need to be seen and heard in a space where we're not going to get judged for it. Okay, and then I'll just add a little bit about what therapy looks like, particularly for Jehovah's Witnesses or ex-Jehovah's Witnesses. In that context, here's some pieces of it. One is about taking inventory and reassessing fundamental beliefs about the universe. It's about recognizing ingrained values, beliefs, and patterns of behavior, and then determining which ones came from the Jehovah's Witnesses and which ones are more true to your authentic self, and then mindfully selecting which ones we'd like to keep or let go. It's not necessarily all about, if I learned it from the witnesses, then it's got to be garbage. I mean, there's a lot of garbage in there. Let's be real. But sure, there are some other things. I don't know. Here's an easy one. The value of being honest. That's a good value. You may have gotten that from Jehovah's Witnesses, but either way, that's a good one to keep. And yeah, for ex-Jehovah's Witnesses in therapy, a big part of it is about rediscovering your true, authentic self. The person you were and are before being burdened with all the excessive demands of who you were expected to be. What are you like underneath all that? What do you like? What do you not like? Who are you? Who do you want to be? That kind of thing. Now, let me just circle back a minute. I mentioned that there are different types of people that do this work: coaches, counselors, therapists. So let's talk a second about the distinctions between those. So generally speaking, when you're working with a therapist or counselor, they usually have a graduate level degree of some sort. It may be a master's or a doctorate. And just for a quick reference, what you'll see sometimes is a PhD in psychology or a PsyD, which is a doctorate of psychology. And the distinction between those two is that, generally speaking, when someone has a PhD in psychology, they've done a lot more academic work, a lot more research. And as part of those programs, they definitely have hands-on training where they're actually practicing to be a therapist. But generally speaking, it's a lot more limited in relation to the PsyD, or the Doctorate of Psychology, which is what I have. And that tends to be a program that is much more focused on providing practical, real-world experience as a therapist through all 4 years of that graduate program. Again, the bottom line is good people can come out of both programs, and it's really about finding the right fit for you. But in my experience, people with PsyDs are a little bit more equipped on doing the work that comes with working with people. So yeah, therapists and counselors are generally more qualified to work with diagnosable mental health issues and serious trauma. This is especially important if you have maybe a biological diagnosable issue, such as bipolar, major depression, anxiety disorders, that kind of thing. And therapists and counselors generally have more extensive training in these areas. Often they'll also have specialties around grief, depression, anxiety, and different kinds of trauma. Now, coaches, on the other hand, generally go through a lot less education. It can vary. It's really an area that's not quite as regulated. There's programs that I think they're as short as getting some sort of certificate after a couple of weekends. But then there's definitely much more established programs that are 6-month programs, but intensive, really training those people to do this kind of work. And coaches are generally more goal-oriented. And these goals are around personal or professional growth or areas of relational improvement, that kind of thing. And yeah, if you have a serious mental health issue, coaches are probably not going to be the place that you're going to want to start. That said, I want to double back on what I said earlier. I have encountered so many different types of people that are coaches or they're counselors or they're therapists. And once you strip away the title, honestly, it's just about the person, and I have encountered amazing people in all of those fields. I have encountered amazing people who have done 6-8 years of school, and yes, they're also just an amazing therapist with a wealth of knowledge. And I have encountered people that have gone through much shorter programs as coaches, but they are just intuitively really good at this job. They know how to hold space, they know how to connect with you, to really be there, and to work shit out with you. So unless you have a significant diagnosable mental health issue, don't let that distinction between coaches or counselors or therapists stop you from accessing the help that's available from somebody that feels like a good fit for you. And yeah, just for reference, I'll throw in what psychiatrists are. So psychiatrists, they're like a different breed for the most part. They're generally about prescribing medications, which can be amazing in the right circumstances, really. I mean, I know medications get a bad rap, and yeah, maybe for good reason. But there are so many cases where medication is actually the exact thing that needs to happen in order to level out, in order for somebody to actually start to thrive, or even just to be able to get to a point where they have the capacity to work through some really difficult things, once they have their biology a little more regulated. But yeah, psychiatrists usually do, they're like 15, 20-minute appointments. In my experience, this isn't always the case, but most psychiatrists are not like people persons. I've encountered a couple that are authentically interested and invested in you as a person and really want to understand you better. But most of the time, you kind of get a feeling of they're just sort of going, all right, do you check off all the items on this list? Well, in this case, then I will prescribe you that. You come back in a month, you tell me how you're feeling. If it's not working out, we'll readjust the medication. And again, it's a super useful and important service. But psychiatrists are generally not the people that you're going to be looking for that kind of emotional connection and growth. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about how to go about finding a therapist. There are a few different avenues, and if you have insurance, probably that's the best place for you to start. Visit your insurance provider's website, and generally they'll have a list of clinicians in your area, as well as their specialties, that you can choose from that will be covered by your insurance. If you're in a position to pay out of pocket, you'll have a wider range of options. Now, it may not work in all situations, but word of mouth is, in my opinion, one of the best ways of finding a good therapist. I've noticed that people that do good therapy, whatever modality, they have no trouble finding work because their clients are very happy with the work that they do and will generally share that with other people. But if you don't have any leads in that area, it's also fine to just Google what you're looking for. Type in therapist or coach with some of the things that you're interested in working on, maybe some modalities you'd like to work with. And then, just take a little extra time to explore their online presence, see whether they're well-reviewed, and see if you can get a feel for them through their website. As I touched on earlier, finding a therapist with a background in religious trauma is not the most important thing. It's nice, don't get me wrong, it's a nice thing. And one of the most common things I hear from people I work with is what a relief it is to be able to talk to somebody who they don't have to explain what the governing body is, or just all of the crazy lingo, or even just understanding the experience of what it's like to be in this religion. And then no, it's not the same as being Catholic or whatever. I've heard that sometimes from therapists I've worked with. They're like, oh yeah, you're Jehovah's Witness? Oh yeah. Yeah, I was Catholic. Ooh, that guilt is a bitch, huh? I'm like, you don't know. You have no idea. So yes, if you have the ability to access somebody that has that kind of background or frame of reference, that's great. It's really nice. However, there's not a whole lot of us out there, and I think it's really important that you don't let that box you in, because a good therapist will be authentically interested in learning about your experience through your lens, and there can be a lot of value in you articulating that experience in the presence of fresh eyes. You have these moments where you share something that you took for granted as just a typical normal thing, and you'll see by their response that, oh my goodness, that is very unusual. That is not a normal or healthy thing. And that exchange can have its own kind of magic. Again, the most important thing is the connection. That you feel connected to them in some way, that you like them, you feel like they like you. And this is the thing to look for first and foremost when you start looking for a therapist. And when you start, I encourage you to think of it kind of like a dating mindset. Set up as many consultations as you can, and then go to each of them with the mindset of figuring out whether you liked each one. In most cases, one visit will be enough. And if you're not feeling it, just keep moving. Try another one. You'll know when it clicks, Generally speaking, if it clicks, you'll have this feeling of safety, that maybe you feel a little taken care of or cared about. You'll find the interaction flows relatively easy. Also, generally speaking, if they get to a point where you actually feel comfortable crying or laughing, that's a really good sign. And then, yeah, you'll leave with this feeling of, you know what, I kind of like them. I'd like to see them again. If you don't feel anything like that, don't waste your time. Just keep looking. Because when you find somebody that has that connection with you, anything's possible. It's so much you can build from there. Okay, so let me take a few minutes to talk about red flags. Things that are big no-nos if you encounter them. If you feel that they're being judgmental in any kind of way, or if you feel like they're trying to push you in a way that doesn't feel good for you, these are red flags. Now, I will add the caveat that in more developed relationships with a therapist, sometimes a good therapist will challenge you. You know, they might give you a reflection that's hard to hear, asking you to look at something that feels really scary to look at. But that type of thing only happens and is only effective after you've built a solid base of trust with that therapist. If you're feeling that right out of the gate, stop. Just move on, find somebody else. Similarly, another red flag is if they're pushing too hard for you to divulge your deepest trauma. Again, revisiting deep trauma and going to some difficult places is part of the work of a lot of these therapies, but that should only happen, again, after trust has been well established. Okay, here's some more red flags. You don't really feel like they're listening. You know, their eyes just kind of glaze over. They're asking questions that clearly reflect that they didn't hear anything that you just said. That's a bad sign. Another red flag. You simply talk for a full hour and they never add anything much more than, how did that make you feel? That phrase is so tainted for us because it is a good question, but it's just so cliche, and it tends to be one which therapists who aren't very good at their job will lean real heavily on as a crutch when they don't know what to say. And yeah, you know, sometimes it's good and cathartic to unload verbally. Trust me. I know that. There's some sessions where I'm like, I just need an hour and just stay out of my way and I got some shit to say, you know? And that's important. That can be really good and cathartic. But not much good comes of that kind of verbal vomiting if that's the only mode of interaction that you have with the person. As a regular way of interacting, it just tends to get us more mired in our own terrible stories. Another red flag, if the therapist spends a lot of time disclosing a lot of personal information or has a tendency to make every topic about themselves in some way, this is also a big red flag. There are times when personal disclosure is appropriate, and you'll know it because it'll feel useful in some way. And even though they're sharing something about themselves, it's not quite as much about them as it is about how it supports whatever the work you're doing with them. And then finally, to close out the red flag sessions, I'll just say that therapy, in my opinion, and I believe this to be true, should always feel useful. Every session. Now, sure, there may be some sessions that are maybe a little less productive than others, or maybe leave on a note where it's kind of unfinished or we still haven't figured something out. But most times you should leave a session with the feeling that that was time well spent. And if it's working really well, that it should be something you actually kind of look forward to. You know, that spot in your week where you can really just open up and work through some stuff. I say this because there are some people who spend years going to the same therapist with this kind of indefinite feeling of like, I don't know, maybe if I keep doing this for a little longer, something will shift. But in actuality, they haven't felt like they've made much progress in their life. And they're just endlessly kind of covering the same ground. This is bad therapy. Or at best, it's just a huge sign that this is not the right therapist or modality for you. Of course things take time. Of course you're not going to resolve everything in one session. But there should be a feeling of forward momentum, like we're getting somewhere, that we're chipping away at it, that we're a little bit better off than we were last session in some way. If that's not happening, it's bad therapy. All right, so to close out the show, I'm going to take a little time and just talk about my own experience in therapy. So when I left the Jehovah's Witnesses around the age of 18, I did what is very common for a lot of people to do, which is like just dive in and move forward. And yeah, I fully invested in myself. A lot of reckless and sinning and exciting and I don't know, trying everything and anything. And that was a very exciting time in my life, one which I encourage everybody to embrace as a phase, really just enjoying the excitement of all the newness and all the different things you can do and all the different ways of being and things to try, which is amazing. But again, like a lot of people who choose this path, it tends to kind of catch up with you a little bit. There's some unfinished business there. So I got to a point about 10 years after leaving the organization where things just fell to shit. And I was depressed in a real, real bad way. Like I was just out of ideas and things were going in a bad direction. I had no idea how to shift it. And at that time of my life, I'm from the Northeast, which is kind of a little bit of a hard-edged people. I had this typical tough guy attitude, like, what is therapy supposed to do? Like, what, I'm just gonna talk about things and it's gonna magically be better or something, I'm like, I have friends, I can talk to my friends. What's the difference? Like, I'm gonna pay money to go talk to somebody? But I was in such a bad, low place at that time that I had to try anything. And I'm like, all right, therapy seems to be a thing that helps some people, so I guess I'll try this. And I got really lucky. I got paired up with this guy, Duncan Patterson, just a really solid, good human being that, I felt that connection right away. But even so, as we started, I had so many defenses about this thing, and I was just grilling him. Like, what is this? How is it supposed to work? Why am I supposed to talk about my feelings? How is that supposed to help me? And I would just pelt him with questions, And he was really sweet and patient, and he did his best to answer those questions the best that he could. But in those conversations, he also said to me, he said, listen, there's actually aspects of this that we don't fully understand why it works, but we have very concrete research backing up that it does work, that it does help in most situations. And what he said to me, he said, listen, I know you have a lot of doubts and a lot of resistance to this, but if you could just suspend disbelief, give me 6 months. Just come once a week for 6 months. See how it plays out. Just invest yourself in the process and trust that something good will come out of it. He said, I can almost guarantee that you will be glad that you did. And so I did. I trusted him. I liked him. I felt like he was somebody I could trust. And I suspended my disbelief and kept going. And sure enough, I don't think it was even 6 months. I think it was maybe 2 or 3 months, maybe, and I was in a real bad place. But 2 or 3 months, I had a noticeable difference. All of a sudden, things felt lighter and more manageable and I could feel things, and I found myself laughing again, all of these things that were so absent for a long time during that depression. And as I went through, I did get a better understanding of what we're doing in a way, but there are still aspects of this work. I mean, I've been doing this for 15 years now, and part of the reason I love it so much is because I'm continually surprised. Every single person I work with has a different energy, a different kind of magic, a different type of way of being in the world. There's always something to discover. And I feel really lucky because my job is to help them discover things about themselves. But I'll be honest, part of the reason I do this is very selfish because, one, I'm super fascinated by it, but also because I discover things about myself in the process. I'm always discovering new ways of being in the world or different ways to approach certain challenges in life. And at this point, let's see, that was about a little less than 20 years ago that I started going to therapy. And since then, I haven't been in therapy all that time, but I've revisited therapy over the years. And usually sometimes it'll be a couple of months, sometimes it'll be a year or two. And then actually things will start humming along, life is going good, and I don't really need it so much. But it's always been there to return to. And so over the course of that time, I've had maybe 4 therapists, and they all hold such a special place in my heart. And each of them had different ways of working. and had some useful skills and tools to teach. But really what was most important is that each of them offered a special type of connection and insight that unlocked something in me. And I don't think I would have done as well if I had just stayed with one of those therapists the whole time. Each of them represented something different at a different point in my life and something different that I needed. And none of them had any background in religious trauma syndrome. And so sure, yeah, that meant that I had to do a little more work on my own and utilize the therapy as a vehicle for me understanding that part of myself better. But all of those therapists absolutely helped me in my journey, not only in relation to the Jehovah's Witness stuff, but just in my personal journey, in my emotional depth, and my ability to feel, to be more alive, to thrive. Anyway, all of this is to just try to communicate how fucking awesome therapy is. It's fucking great. And it may feel scary, and I know there's a lot to dig into, and what is this going to be like? But again, provided you follow these guidelines and really find somebody you have a good connection with, man, it is juicy for the soul, and it's not a fix-all. It doesn't mean I don't still fall apart sometimes, but I have a place to go to now, to work through those things and grow from them, And for us as ex-Jehovah's Witnesses, it's so important, particularly for those who have left and their whole family isn't talking to them. It can feel so isolating, and then we're burdened with these ideas that we're supposed to be able to handle it all on ourselves. Particularly guys have this mentality, I should just be able to handle it and I'm just going to suffer in silence. Fuck that. That's just awful and not doable and a recipe for just spiraling. We need help. We need connection. We need somebody that's there to support us, where there's an authentic connection, where we feel safe and we can unpack and we don't have to hold it all in. So yeah, I hope you give therapy a try if you're thinking about it. Give it a shot. What have you got to lose? Fuck around and find out. And yes, of course, I am a therapist. And if you're feeling my energy and feeling connected and it might be a good fit, by all means, go to my website, drryanlee.com. I offer a free consultation for everybody. And part of the reason for this is that I practice what I preach. I don't do work with everybody. I'll be honest. In fact, I probably end up doing ongoing regular work with maybe 1/3 to a half of the people that I do consultations with, because really getting that connection is so important from both sides. But that said, don't let that dissuade you from setting up a consultation. I really enjoy meeting everybody. I love consultation. I have certain days set aside for consultations, and I love them because I just get to see and meet so many different types of people. And for the most part, what I've noticed from the people that have those consultations, even when we don't do ongoing work, I get feedback that the consultation is still very useful. I put a lot of effort into making sure that we make the most out of that time, that something useful comes out of it, and hopefully by the time you leave, even if we don't work together, you'll still have a sense of maybe what the next steps are for you. All right. So, that was a super long episode. I hope that you found it helpful. If you did, I would be so delighted if you could just take a second to hit that subscribe button, maybe leave us a little rating or a review, and pay it forward by sharing this podcast with other people who might benefit. If you have any questions, feedback, or ideas for future topics, email me at drryanlee@drryanlee.com or visit my website at drryanlee.com. Until next time, remember, you are brave. You are strong. You can do this. Go get some therapy. And you, my friend, are not alone.